Hello. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to host you here, Tristan. And we'll talk about sustainability. It's a big world these days. It's been around for decades. It was in the front row. It was sitting in the corner, I believe. But I think it's time that it comes to the front row. Yeah. But before we dive deeper into the subject, please just a short introduction.
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Tristan and care a lot about building impact into technology and technology businesses. Kind of for the last 10 years, I've kind of been sitting at the center of impact in technology or impact in startups, however you want to put it. And half of that was building and selling a couple companies. One that was more like social impact and media, the other one was kind of more like an Airbnb for retail. And then I spent like the other half actually investing in startups, always thinking with this kind of like idea of impact or sustainability in mind. I think we played around with the name for this session a bunch to try to figure out how to make it the most relevant and applicable to all types of businesses and all sizes and shapes. And sustainability, I think, can have a really big word and mean a lot of things. But we'll try to hopefully walk you through a little bit on how to, think about it in terms of a founder, in terms of individual, and like how that can scale up into your business in different ways. And so that's kind of been my, personal directive, and anything I've done is like find that kind of sustainability and in anything I do, whether that's venture capital or startups or some of the stuff I'm doing now, which is like a little bit more climate tech related. I'm working with one company called CTO.ai, which is kind of about making development teams scale easier and become more inclusively. But I also run a syndicate on AngelList called Cool Climate Collective and invest in climate startups. And that's a big word too. So maybe I'll stop speaking and we'll start the questioning.
Oh, just go on. We'll go back to the climate cool syndicate, yeah. But before that, you mentioned Airbnb for retail, yeah. Because my first question for you: when did you start? When did you decide that you were going to be active in this sustainability initiative? Yeah, but it's actually you didn't decide. You were kind of probably born into it. Yeah, because Airbnb for retail. Can you explain the concept a little bit more? Because I think this is like a sustainability startup. Yeah, in a sense.
It's maybe not directly, but in the sense of how we thought about it was like I was coming off of this bootstrapped social impact media network that's the previous company, and then was thinking a lot about urban innovation and creativity and how to unlock creativity in cities. And 1 in 10 stores in the US sit empty. And so we were looking at vacant retail space, and we're trying to figure out how to make that a more efficient industry so that we could get artists and designers and creators that wanted to meet their customers in person through like a pop-up shop or an event or a short-term retail store of some kind, be able to do that. And so we, one side we were looking at, we're going to make make the streets a little bit brighter, more enjoyable for the people of the city. And then the other side is like, we're going to, help these businesses grow and on both sides of the marketplace, both like get more customers for a retail store landlord, as well as, get customers for the retail store opener. So that's kind of how we thought about it. Was like, how do we, contribute to this like urban dialogue and support store owners and real estate owners in the same way, and as well as the community. So it's kind of it was kind of that sort of thinking, I guess, that spawned the company. And then then there's always nice things that like certain trends, having the right timing with your startup. The sharing economy was really big at that moment, and so think that helped us raise a decent amount of venture capital, get some really great investors, and be able to start scaling it up to other big cities in the US.
Okay, yeah, besides sustainability, circular economy goes hand in hand, so this was kind of a circle, with the Airbnb for retail.
Yeah, I think we maybe in some ways just thought about it and how can you have more smaller cycles of stores, and kind of like it was almost more a part of this like idea of like you can rent, you can live your life off of not owning, minimal ownership.
Yeah, that's the thing, minimal ownership, nowadays with the younger generation at least, so you mentioned Cool Climate Syndicate, what's the vision? What's the motive behind it? You mentioned also you're a VC, you're a climate investor, so maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about this role you are putting yourself in it in the last year, or maybe even before? When did you start being a climate investor?
I started before I realized I was a climate investor. I was at 500 Startups, a notable, accelerator VC in San Francisco, and probably did about a dozen climate investments just because I thought they were good investments, not necessarily thinking about it from a climate perspective. And that kind of, over the last few years, I think led to kind of analyzing, what the type of work I'm doing and what's my true mission. And it kind of, I was like, the one thing, my one cause, I think, is the environment and, having a real impact there. So how do I take my skills and apply it to this sector? And I think now's the right time. I think there's been a big transition from like impact investing and clean tech, where it had its first generation, but now like clean tech has moved into the generation of it's cheaper, solar, wind, it's cheaper, all these, the top renewables are cheaper than coal, gas, oil, so that's a huge factor. Also, impact investing is totally transitioned to this more of this like triple bottom line where it's, its profit is up there with the people on the planet, and it's actually one of the probably biggest opportunities and biggest challenges of our entire lives. COVID, if you thought COVID was bad for dealing with this for 2 years, I mean, climate change is going to be something that is going to be like a century-long struggle, if not longer, depending how quickly we can accelerate some of the climate solutions in the next decade. So that's kind of how we thought about starting this collective of climate-motivated operators, people that have worked in tech and they want to invest in climate startups, and we want to give them this vehicle to easily find startups that they can fund and have an impact, but also like, in this kind of 5 to 10 year range, actually get a return, because they're going to be dealing with very big opportunities, very big sectors, and totally the potential to make billion-dollar companies. So we thought about it in that sense and thought we needed to accelerate the number of ideas in the space at an early stage.
Okay, you're mentioning climate tech companies, What about the companies that are not connected to climate tech, That maybe they are financial companies or, shoe companies. How can they act responsible and sustainable? Do you have some good examples about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One we were kind of discussing before the session is that if you just break down like the word sustainability, I've kind of used sustainability, impact, climate, I think a lot of these all kind of come back to the same place of like, what is your purpose? What is your mission? Like maybe the purpose is your individual, what do you care about? How do you want to live your life? How do you want your organization to operate? And as you get to the organization, that's more of your mission. And I think like the easiest way to start thinking about it is like, okay, how do we want to leave the world in a better place? No matter what sort of business you have, it's like, there's certain things that are sustainable and there's certain things that aren't. And if you just break down what sustainable is, it's kind of like the circular economy example. It's like something that you can do repetitively, but every circle it nurtures instead of like extracts. And I think we had a lot of like extractive businesses, whether that's a literal term and that's like oil and gas, or that's like more of a figurative term and that's like, selling over consumerism. But I think like trying to find that purpose for yourself and defining your impact that you want to have can happen in a variety of ways. Like, for example, you said shoe company. I'm wearing Allbirds, who is, probably the most sustainable shoe company there is. Like, literally the rubber on the bottom is made from eucalyptus. The threads are made from sheep that they own the farm. And so they've created all these pathways that are they can recycle their products. It's made out of the renewable resources. And they're on the track, if not already there, to becoming a carbon negative business, which is kind of a new type of business, but it's actually they use less emissions, in a positive way. So I think it's really exciting. I think carbon negative businesses are going to start to become really, really frequent. It's going to be a selling point for consumers, and they're going to put out emit less emissions, and actually be a carbon sink almost as an organization. So it's kind of something that can apply to anyone, I guess, as I think about sustainability. And it's not just it's partly environmental in its truest form, but the other form is just thinking about how you want to leave that kind of positive legacy with the organization that you work with or run.
Okay, yeah, but maybe more delicate question, yeah. Do you think that sustainability and profit exclude itself, Because we are in a business, yeah? We need to make money, yeah? So how can we make money and be sustainable and the world be a better place, yeah? Is it possible? Are we too late? What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fallacy that has proven itself over the past 10 years too, is that, if you look at the S&P 500, an index fund that invested in the S&P 500, and then you took out all the fossil fuel companies, and then you compared the two over the last decade, you actually would make more money on the portfolio that had no fossil fuel companies. One example. I think the carbon negative example is another one where that's actually sustainability in this day and age. And we were also talking about your daughter and the youngest generations that they just get impact, and when companies are lying to them or not doing what they could do, and they're just profits over people, profits over the planet. And so I think we're in an age that's really exciting. All the young people want to buy products that are great. Investments are actually better when they're a sustainable portfolio, and so it's become a really a more aligned time, I guess, with Mother Nature and the planet.
Yeah, we are aware that our planet has boundaries, yeah, and that at the moment we are using 1.7 planet resources to the year, yeah. Australia is using 5 planets for 1 year resources, yeah. And I think we are not aware of the threat that it's coming really, really fast, yeah? And as you said, the smaller wave is COVID, the next wave probably recession, and then the big wave is climate change, yeah? So do you believe that person by person can change the situation, or it has to be more than just you wearing a sustainable shoe?
Yeah, that becomes the biggest challenge. I think I'm a believer that corporations and governments are going to have the biggest impact, but that's not to say that we should live by our values. And I think the biggest thing too is by living your values is also the influence that the collective, the group of people, the population has to influence larger institutions that they either work for, lead, or participate in as a citizen. And so that I think that's kind of where I go with it, because for example, Stripe, does everyone know Stripe, the payments company? They're they're a unicorn. They're going to IPO soon. They've basically made payments really easy. Love the product. So you're probably well, how do you make this kind of what's the sustainability factor of this in some way? And they created a Stripe climate team that basically, with the flip of a switch at checkout, they can offset or do carbon removal activities for every, however much that transaction cost. And so they basically then funnel this money that they made, which was like $10 million. I mean, just over the past like less than a year, I think. And they directed it to like early stage carbon removal technology. Things like direct air capture, where they suck carbon out of the air and they turn it into a solid and buried underground, or things like running tide or rising tide, and they grow kelp forests and make the ocean a bigger like carbon sink, so it sucks more carbon out of the air. And so they were like, but by like funding these really early stage things, then they accelerate their development to understand what resources do we have, what technologies actually work to then reduce our CO2 emissions, and what can we scale. So they're trying to get to that point faster. So they're having like a pretty big impact by just doing this small little thing that you wouldn't have expected from a payments company.
Okay, Stripe, yeah, it's a very known company. It was a unicorn, I believe, yeah? So they have financial means to do that, yeah? What about for the company that is struggling, maybe an early stage startup, yeah? As a founder, you worry about revenue, you worry about your customers, you worry about getting more money, more investment. How can you be sustainable in an easy way, How can you start?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, that's kind of one of the common challenges to thinking about like ESG, or environmental social governance around early stage companies, because it's like, well, I gotta make money, I gotta get customers, I don't have time to deal with this. There's a lot of great resources. We talked about, we can send a follow-up with like, the Founders Institute has a great playbook and calculator kind of thing that you can go through to figure out what UN development goals that you want to tie to. The UN has 17 development goals, and so there might be one that you have a particular strong impact on, and that ties back to your business, and you want to like make sure that as the business grows, this impact grows with it. 500 Startups has an ESG for startups downloadable ebook that you could get. So there's definitely more and more resources out there, and even you see startups that are converting to B Corps, or they're starting as B Corps. And B corporations are basically that sort of idea again of like the triple bottom line business, but they put a framework to it, so you have to go through this like vetting process to be actually certified B Corp. But the benefit of all this too is that that's what people are looking for, right? They want to see that they're, it's not just, Gen Z investing in sustainable products or carbon negative products. It's not just like the hip thing to do. It's, if you're thinking about, I do a lot of like community building work and look at ways to help companies grow by building a community, fostering a community around what they're doing. And I think that's another way to think about it. It's like, if you went to your community of customers or your greater community around the business where like the bigger the people, what are the common values and shared values that you have with that community? And how would you explain what you're doing and like why you're doing it? And I think it just has to be the age of being purely transactional with your customer. I think it's just dying. And so to even stay up with like current, marketing and growth activities, it's like you have to have a really authentic voice. You have to foster a community, and you have to like, show that you care about people a bit more than just your bottom line. And I think that's just people, sniff that out. So if you are building a startup, it even works for like employing and retaining talent. I think there's just so many angles that like having a clear impact as well as a clear goal of where you want to go with the company ties so closely together, and it should be shared in a more transparent way. So you're attracting the best talent, so that you're getting customers bought in more than just like, hey, I purchased once on your site, but like you're creating repeat customers and deeper connections and relationships. So that's kind of how I see like the whole world trending. And I think if you start to build that into your startup or your company, it's never too late to start. And even if it's never too early to start.
Yeah, I agree. The sustainability or sustainable mindset, it's very personal, yeah. Um, I come from the tourism industry, yeah, and sustainability and sustainable growth and green location has been around for a decade at least, yeah. But up till 2019, nothing much changed, yeah, because everybody flew around the world for 3 days to New York, or 1 day to Singapore. The flights were booming, yeah, and nobody cared, yeah. So, what is your perspective on it? You know, because we are not going to stop flying, yeah, because we are explorers, yeah, we are not staying put. But do you see any solution to this issue or challenge?
Yeah, that's a great one, and it makes me think of like, okay, first there's kind of this like, some people have this mindset, right? Especially in the tech scene, where you're like, well, technology will fix it. Technology will fix it eventually. And sometimes that's like, I think, used in the wrong way, where it's like, oh, they use it as an excuse to say we don't need to change what we're doing today. Probably in the airlines industry, it's like, okay, we can't necessarily, green jet fuel today, but there are interesting people working on jet fuel alternatives. There's this company called Boom Supersonic that's trying to do faster flights, so ideally less fuel is used. So there's some interesting things there, but on the way to get there, I think that's where things like offsets come in, where, and it's, and just,
tracking your own carbon footprint. Like there's tools like REN, WREN, where you can go through your whole life, like your transportation, your house, your flight habits, and you can understand like actually how much carbon am I emitting, and you can very easily offset it. And there's obviously ways to also reduce that, right? Like taking more necessary things, but kind of my higher level philosophy is that, I would love to see the airline companies, come in and like actually do carbon removal activities, so they know almost in tandem they're removing carbon at the same time that the flight is emitting carbon. I think that's the end goal, to get to like net neutral for companies. Like 1/3 of the Fortune 500 already have goals to be at zero emissions by 2030 or earlier. So it's these biggest companies, are some of the ones like kind of pushing, have the most to do, but they're also saying like, by the end of the decade, like, we need to really step up. And that's like, like Amazon, for example. My wife works at Rivian. They have a contract to buy 100,000 electric vehicles from Rivian. And so like they're starting to like, really like push the envelope. And so
Rivian, it's my favorite company. Yeah? It's like Tesla, yeah.
It's like an outdoorsy Tesla. Like they want to have their charging network in national parks, and enable people. They have a longer range than Tesla, so that you can go further without finding a charging station, things like that. Yeah. But I think that's what's exciting too. Is like you see Stripe or Shopify or Amazon. These companies that are very quickly leading and changing their it's not necessarily easy to do to completely change, especially if you think about Amazon's operations, but they're doing it because they know that this is an important thing to do quickly to preserve our world and our ecosystems and our biodiversity, all the important stuff that nature gives us.
Yeah, you mentioned Amazon. We were talking about my favorite brand. Well, it was my favorite brand, IKEA, before I got to see the documentary. Yeah, so people act like cost effectively. Yeah, and when you need a nice furniture that's not expensive, you go to IKEA. But do people know where IKEA gets the wood? So it's kind of it's a challenge for everybody, and I think bigger companies should step up and really fast. Yeah. So maybe before we end the session, do we have any questions for Tristan?
So everybody's talking about sustainability, and I think it's because coming a new modern hit and everybody wants to use it. Oh, I'm a sustainable company and I have this and I have this certificate. The same as with, for example, fishing, and you could buy the certificate, for example, dolphin safe or something like that, and we all know it was just a matter of money. So my question is, for example, I have company and I of course have a chain of suppliers. How can I even know if the suppliers are sustainable? Because if they are not sustainable, then my product is not sustainable. So is there even a plan to make like a really good governmental or global framework on which we can actually calculate who is sustainable and who is not? You know, because right now it's just another trending word that everybody wants to put on. I mean, I'm not saying it's not okay, but I'm just saying it's all over the place, and you know, everybody interprets it as it wants.
Yeah. I think there's kind of 2 points there. One is like, how do you actually track supply chain, things like that? I mean, there's more and more tools to do those sorts of things. Like, and maybe a good example is like Patagonia and some of the stuff that they've done transparently about how they follow their whole supply chain. And I think then there's like software that actually like helps you do some of those things better. Like Watershed is a new platform that's going to come out, kind of more on like the emissions side. So it's like helps you better understand like where emissions are coming from and how much. There's also like a tool called Patch that's kind of an API that helps play into that sort of emissions tracking. So there's definitely tools out there, and I think then the other part of the question is like, how do you not greenwash, right? Like, not just call yourself sustainable just for just calling yourself sustainable, and kind of like that this like idea of business changing to this more community-led approach, this community growth approach, is that transparency, and not, I think Google.org. The old Google.org CEO, Larry Brilliant, said, like, you have to, like, you can't sprinkle, it's like a cake, impact's like a cake, and you can't sprinkle, the impact on top, you have to bake it into the cake. And so I think, one, it's like, you're asking the right questions, and, and it's totally okay to ask, come with these questions to your suppliers, and it's also like, maybe that means like, you can have that influence because you're working, they're a client of yours, and you can help encourage them to change, or you can change providers. But yeah, I would check out Patagonia. I would think about how to, create that sustainability as part of the core of the business, I guess. And when I think of, again, sustainability, like breaking down the term, is like, if your company grows, then your impact should grow. Your specific impact, whether that's one of the UN sustainability goals, or like it's climate emissions. It's like, if whatever that impact you want to have is, should naturally grow with the company, and that's how it's more baked in, versus just like, hey, now we're just going to go offset like all the stuff we did, so we don't really have to work on changing or greening any part of our operation. And that's, I think, where it's clearer. And we went through that greenwashing phase too, I guess, with Clean Tech 1.0. And so I think people, are also, I think, a bit more savvy, right? Like but yes, I think that's probably where like the greenwashing piece is now, is like, it's not enough. It's not enough for businesses to just offset everything, but it is a good first step. And then as you think about, how do I, better mitigate versus just focusing on the offsetting side. So I hope that helps a little bit. There's definitely a handful of tools out there that should hopefully help you, but sometimes it's just these conversations is what takes it to start it.
Cool.
We are optimists. Tristan is optimist.
Well,
I'm definitely an optimist, so.
Applause for, please.